Welcome to KvK Crash Course. In this video, we're going to be going over the basics of KvK, and the following video will also continue this on as well. Due to the fact that there's so much to cover, that's going to take up 2 whole videos to do this. But whether you're a new player, a player returning to KvKs, or even a seasoned veteran player who's just looking for a couple of tricks to help better their experience, yes, look no further than here. So in today's video, we're going to be going over the PvE aspect of KvK. Whether that's the Barbs, the Forts, Karuak, Kahar, Bastions, the Fog, anything that involves getting yourself ready for combat. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's go over the main 2 ways in which you're going to be using your AP. Barbarians and Forts. So Barbarians, in this KvK format, are level 41 and above all the way up to 55. These are very difficult to defeat for lower power players, but if you're in the 50 to 60 million mark, it probably won't be too hard. You won't be able to farm endlessly, but you'll be able to defeat them fairly easily. The big benefit of Barbarian patrols is they are very easy to dump AP, and they are AP efficient early on, with the honor points giving you 10 honor points for every 80 AP expended, meaning you get 8 AP per honor point generated, which beats out the early level forts. However, that's really where the benefits end. The rewards tend to be better for forts, the alliance rewards are better for forts, and the overall AP efficiency later in the game are better for forts. So now that we're talking about them, let's go to those. Forts are better, like I said, overall for rewards, better overall for the alliance, and better overall for AP efficiency once you get to the higher levels of forts. However, they aren't quite as efficient in the early game, although you're talking about 8 AP per honor point for Barbarians versus 10 per fort, so the rewards kind of outweigh the cost in that regard. But they take time, and they're not as able to be done by yourself. Whereas I can go on a barbarian hunt for hours by myself, I need to mobilize 5 to 6 people to defeat a fort. So if you have the coordination, forts are almost always better. But for example, on night shift, you might see people hunting barbarians more, and it's a more efficient way just because you don't want to waste the AP if you're trying to dump AP before you go to bed for the night, or before you step away for some hours without your AP spilling over. So whenever you can, I recommend going for forts because the rewards are better, and it's generally just better for the kingdom and the alliance as a whole. But you can also go for barbarians if you need to dump AP quickly, and barbarians are a popular fixture in the late stages of KvK for people who are pushing honor, because you need to just put out so much honor very quickly, and barbarians is the way to generate quick honor, whereas forts are the way to generate efficient honor. Now let's go over the 2 other ways you're going to be expending AP in KvK, and that is Karuak and Kahar. So Karuak is very much like the original Karuak ceremony, except for it's only 30 stages, and you're on a time limit, which makes it a little bit more urgent, and it's not really a big factor for any player who's 50 million plus until you get to the stage 3-4, where the time limit really starts to crunch on you. But as you complete levels, you gain rewards. You gain some crystals, you gain some season coins, and you gain AP experience tomes, rather. And a boost here, as you can see, that boosts your crystal output. And this crystal output will hold for 24 hours. So as long as you're collecting it once a day, you're going to keep these crystal gain bonuses. And it's not super significant. You're talking about the equivalent of about 50,000 a day in the first stage, and never more than a couple 100,000 a day at max. So it's not game breaking, but it is respectable, and it's something that is definitely worthwhile to do because it doesn't cost a ton of AP. It only costs about, well, 3,000 AP to complete, because you don't have to use AP to attack the Karuak bosses. So you take the 100 to summon it, and that's it. When you are fighting bosses, I recommend targeting the buffers and healers first, especially if you struggle, because if you're trying to attack the damage dealers, you tend to just run out of steam if you're not careful, And whereas if you attack the buffers and healers, the damage dealers can then be swarmed down. And I recommend you attacking the first enemy with your tankiest march first, and then sending the other 4 marches to attack. So if you have a Richard or a Martel, or anybody who you have to be a tank, you want to attack the enemy first, and then once the lines draw onto them from the other marches you're fighting with, then send all your marches to attack. Because then the enemies that are not being attacked currently are going to target the tank first because they are the first ones to attack. And then once you defeat that first enemy you're targeting, you switch to the second and then the third if it's applicable. But overall, that is the way I found to help get more consistency, keep your damage dealers alive and dealing more damage, and overall getting a better clear time for Karuak. The second thing is Kahars. Now, Kahars are very similar to Barbarians in the way that they work mechanically, meaning you can summon them, however, and then once you've summoned them, you have a certain amount of time to defeat them or they will despawn. But, just like Barbarians, you can use a march to chain them. So, for example, I love using my Artemisia and YSG to chain Kahars. And what I will do is aggro one, and then eventually try to chain into another with the 2 AoE attacks. And what I could do then is just keep them following me and move along the route. And the self-silence on this really does help. But overall, as long as you're keeping them engaged, you can keep moving just a little bit at a time so that they keep attacking you. And then you just get into range of the next march. What you could even do is wait for the first skill and then move your second march. And then once you are in position, you will just want to try to hit them. This is easier to do with a circle AoE over a fan AoE, but it is doable with both. And once you master this, you can save a ton of AP, because while it costs an extra 200 AP to attack a Kahar, now I've gotten 2 for the cost of 1. And this is particularly great if you could find a big open area, because then you could put 10 of them on the field and you could trigger this multiple times. But if you have the patience and you have the knowledge and you're just careful with it and slowly move them, you could do this. You could also get better results if you have a tank, because you don't have to worry about out-damaging the Kahar before you move to the next target. But overall, this will just save you a ton of rewards. And these Kahar's treasures, once you collect them, give you a very respectable boost to crystals, as well as potentially some other rewards. I've only seen a gold head come out of it once, and I still think I might have just imagined that. They say it's possible. I don't think I've seen it often enough to really feel good about it. But this is a great way to save a ton of AP, which saves you the time and energy to be able to use that AP on more Barbarians, more Forts, or on Karuak. So if you can chain them, this is great. I recommend doing it before any major fight. Go down to 4 or 3 whistles in case you need them for your Bastion quests. But other than that, use as many of them as you can, collect all the crystals, and then use that to help push your tech just a little bit further to give you an edge in combat. So the next thing we're going to cover are Bastions. Bastions serve 2 purposes. 1, leveling up your Bastions increases your crystal production, which is super useful for advancing tech and pretty much everything else in the game that's going to drive your combat. And the second thing is unlocking skills at level 6. Now these skills are 2 to a commander, so one pair can have 2 skills attached to them, and you can switch those around. Certain formats will have you be able to augment, like Siege of Orleans lets you do that. And it's very similar though, where you can attach one commander's skill to one commander. And you can't obviously attach the same skill to its own commander. Like, I can't use Epic Joan's skill on Epic Joan. But outside of that, you're pretty much open with whatever you can do. Some of them are better than others. Typically, your Zone 4 Bastions are pretty basic, nothing too crazy. And then once you get to the outer levels, you get more important and more damaging skills, and you tend to get more legendaries And these will vary from KvK to KvK. There are some that tend to occur more often. Those are typically the epics. I've seen Pelagius in just about every one of them. I've seen Kiera in pretty much every one of them. But they do vary from KvK to KvK. But overall, once you get to level 6, it doesn't provide you anything extra except for bonuses to crystal production. So when you're building them up, of course, getting the Bastion skill is important. But the crystal mine work speed increases the same amount at each level, except for the level 10. But the cost to get to the next level becomes much higher. So what I do recommend for anybody who is just starting, and especially in the first couple days, is to balance your bastions as much as you can. We just got this one unlocked recently, but as you can see, I try to keep it as even as possible. If you get one to level 6, that's great, but after that, you want to make sure you get all of them to level 6 before you push any of them to level 10. You do want to push the legendaries before the epics because they do give you a slightly higher boost when you do level them up. But outside of that, trying to keep it as balanced as possible is the best policy that I can recommend for you. Because once you get to level 6, there really isn't anything other than bonus crystal production. So you're better off, for example, leveling up my level 1 here is going to be my next priority instead of pushing Boudica or Joan to level 7. It just doesn't do much for me tactically for crystal production. Whereas it only takes 2 or 3 quests to level up level 1 to level 2, whereas 2 or 3 quests will not even get the other half of this bastion upgraded. So keep that in mind and try to keep a balance, especially in the early stages, and then once you get to the later stages, if you were anticipating that you're going to have combat and you might not win, I recommend you maxing out the ones furthest out first that you might lose the area for, and then coming backwards, because if you do get pushed into your own Zone 4, you can then max your Zone 4 bastions because the territory hasn't been cut yet. So that is just more a crystal bonus production if you're trying to hit your crystal production goals and crystal spending goals for a KvK. But outside of that, it's generally just try to level them up as evenly as you can. Now we will get to what is either everyone's favorite or least favorite thing: fog exploration. Most people have a very strong feeling one way or the other about it, and it can be quite a daunting task, especially if you're not super active. But there is one trick that can make this super easy for you, and I want to share it with you because I think it's very important. What I like to do is at the start of the map, I will clear out my zone as much as I need, and then I can always come back to this when I'm more active. And what I do is I send all 3 of my scouts around this perimeter, and I'll keep sending them through and sending them through. And what you'll notice is it clears out a border, and it basically, I call it frames the rest of the fog. So as I come through, I keep going, and if I happen to need to step away, my marches will eventually come back, and that's great, because what you'll see is they'll cut through, and I'll get to that in a second. But as I'm coming around the frame, I want to try to close it as much as possible. And once I get up to this corner, that's the big gold portion, because that is the furthest point from the map of where I am. But once I get to this corner, we can come across, and I try to complete the frame. And you can leave some spaces up here if you want. The goal is to make sure you have a clean path everywhere. And if you can't be there the whole time, it's not as big of a deal. But the goal is to just try to keep working on that frame. Because once your frame's complete, you have options. So if I'm from my city and I'm going to be away for 45 minutes to an hour, the march to this corner is 20 minutes. So I send a march out here, and I know in 45 minutes, at absolute worst, they'll be right back in my city. And if not, they'll be marching back, and I can send them back out. And I just rinse and repeat this for whenever I'm going to be away. If I'm going to be away for 20 minutes, I might send them over here, because it's only a 10-minute march, and so on and so forth. But you just fit what needs you. And if you're going to be continually active, what I recommend is you basically just do the same thing you do with the first frame, just further in. So I'll be 1, 2, 3, and continue with a new frame. And that just cuts down drastically the amount of distance you have between the furthest point that's not explored and yourself. And it really uses your away time to your advantage. If I'm going to bed, I'd rather march 45 minutes than march 5 minutes, because I can do the 5-minute march when I'm awake and I'm active. So this is a great way to cut down on time, as well as the fact that when you do come back through, you explore all these items and the passes, for example, and it provides a massive spike to your explored fog percentage. On top of the fact that when I do come to explore this area, a good chunk of it's already been explored for me, which saves time on the scouts, and when I am active, it cuts down the time on the active fog tile areas. So it does two things very well. It works great for me, and it is excellent for getting your fog exploration up as quickly as possible. And it works for both people who are active and people who are away more often than not, because the base strategy is the same for both, and the base strategy achieves the same thing while also maximizing the eventual downtime, because even if you are active very often, you will have to sleep at some point. So overall, it's just a very simple but effective trick that I think is really underrated, and I wanted to share with you all. Next, I want to go over one of the other very, very common portions of KvK, and that is the crystal mines, as you can see here, and the research center. These are the two buildings that are exclusive to KvK and are pretty much what drives most of your trades if you are a rally or garrison leader. And they are also important to field marches. But we're going to get into this real quick. The more you level up a crystal research center, you unlock further techs, but you also cut down on the research cost. Granted, at max level, this is only a 5% reduction. This means a 1 million crystal research is 950,000. So this is not the craziest thing in the world, and you don't have to rush this if you are a free-to-play player, because it really only just saves you a little bit of crystals, and unless you're trying to push her max tech as quickly as possible, you will not see significant return on this. However, certain techs will require a certain level, so you may need to push it to a certain extent just to get that next tech unlocked. The mine, however, I think is the higher priority in terms of building them up, because the more you level it up, you increase the hourly crystal production and you increase the maximum production. And this difference is significant. At level 1, you're talking about 150 per hour for a max of 8,000. At level 25, you're talking about 400,000 at 8,000 an hour. At level 20, you're looking at half of that. So if you got a level 1 up, I recommend the mine, and I do recommend maxing out the mine as quickly as possible, because you get double the production, which is better than the 5% reduced research cost. So overall, the sooner you can get this max, the better. Even if it involves pushing away some techs for a little bit to get this done, it will actually provide more for you in the long run. So I highly recommend maxing out this crystal mine as soon as possible. Next, we're going to go over tech. So the tech of this is really very hit and miss. There are some great things and there are some not so great things. The positive thing for most field players is the tech that you get gives you attack. So a maxed out level is 10% attack, which is it's a lot, but it's only the equivalent of about 2.5% health. So gear has a bigger impact than tech does in most cases when it comes to KvK when you're in the field. However, once you get to garrisons or rallies, the gear is more or less equal, so this becomes a significant contributing factor. And you'll see I haven't pushed mine very far. I usually do it the day before combat, depending on what we need. But if you are a field player, you can focus on any number of things. What I really recommend if you are free to play is maxing out your barbarian reports as far as you can, your plunder, because you want more crystals earned from defeating barbarians. Treaties and cultural exchange are both great for maxing out bastions, because bastions will give you a more significant crystal income in the long run than most other things you're going to invest into. So it's better off because you get a flat amount of crystals from the get-go and then the increase in crystal production, and both of them are super useful. What I recommend as a free-to-play, once you do get all of your PvE stuff taken care of, because it makes doing barbarians, farm hunting, honor hunting, and just overall the grind a lot easier, It makes Karuak easier, which is super crucial because it gives you some more crystal tech again, which then feeds back into the tech. And it's they're some of the few talents that actually pay for themselves when you look at it. And as far as you can get skillful operation on both these because it reduces crystal cost, honestly, more significantly, just in this one tech at level 6, more significantly than a maxed out crystal research center. Once you get onto the combat techs, if you are planning on just being a field player, march speed is useful, the regular attack formation is useful, and you can focus on whatever your main troop type has to be in attack. But I would not chase the siege unit attack right away or your off troop type attacks right away because you want to maximize the effectiveness of your main troop type. So if you are a cav player and your infantry march is a support, the additional attack's not going to do a lot for you. Whereas if you get more attack on your damage dealing marches for field, it's going to be a better overall result. Call to arms, the additional troop capacity is nice, but if you are not planning on fielding a 250,000 march with another 50,000 in expansion, really the increased capacity isn't a big deal. If you're a 65 million player and you don't have enough to field 5 full marches of 300,000, call to arms is kind of not a useful talent for you. I again recommend move speed, as I said. Special medicines is something I highly recommend if you are using T5 troops in the field or you're filling garrisons very often, because the amount of reduced healing cost is really, really underrated. 15% on this one, and then if you can manage to push this far as a free-to-play or a spender, if you're a free-to-play, I very much applaud you for getting this far. But if you're a spender, if you can get these two, 40% reduced cost is a lot of saved gold. It is a lot of saved strain on your reserves. And it is just a lot of cutting out the middleman. But if you're a free-to-play on this side, you won't need marching orders. And you really won't need a lot of the heavy expanded formations is not one you're going to anticipate needing. And improved morale and surprise strike, you're not going to be reaching probably in most cases. And if you do, you're only going to reach it to rank 1 or 2. But I would recommend if you were a field player, a free-to-play player, or somebody who's just not planning on spending a lot on tech, avoid the rally capacity buffs, avoid the troop capacity buffs, because they just end up oftentimes being a pitfall for your troops to either get stuck in a garrison and lose a lot more troops, and it becomes more expensive, or you're going to run yourself out of troops very quickly when you have 250,000 in a rally instead of 200,000. So it's better to pace yourself and spread the load and just focus on buffing your own attack so that you can be better in the field and your own passive PvE abilities, which makes it a lot easier to recover in between fights. Lastly, we're going to talk about something that is not necessarily the most crucial thing to everybody, but is also really important to remember when you are pushing, and that is when to push for honor. So you should always be using your daily AP, whether you are putting them on armament trips, whether you are hunting barbarians, whether you're hunting forts, whatever you're doing, use your daily AP. That is the freest way to do anything, and just don't sell yourself short on it. Just make sure you get those done every day. Once you're past that, you want to really pace yourself, because when you are pushing honor, really what matters is the higher end. So when we look at the honor points, the level 51 barbarian is worth twice as much as a level 41 to 45. This means that you're twice as AP efficient. So 1,000 AP spent on level 51 barbarians is going to yield more honor than 1,000 spent on level 41. So you want to save your AP until you've gotten those. This also means that you probably need to win KvK to conceivably push the top ranks at an efficient way. And I don't recommend necessarily pushing for the top 20 if you are just trying to get the rewards. But even if you were trying to just push to get your 80,000 honor points rewards from the Path of Greatness, it is a lot easier to do when you are fighting level 51 barbarians, so long as you have the troops and the ability to do so, because it's just a lot more AP efficient, and you're likely to spend well, literally half as much AP because you're getting twice as much honor for the same AP expenditure. So then you can then push, if you do want to push later on, push at that point when you have double the AP efficiency and you get the best of both worlds. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. And a lot of times people will push up and they might want the rewards, and that's great. But at the end of the day, what matters is how people place at the end of the event. Because I very rarely see the person who leads in the first week in the top 3 or 4 that lead in the first week. At least one of them will not make it to the end. And whether that's the loss of the KvK or just running out of AP, it is easier to see in the last 2-3 days how much AP the top 5 have, and then to push for it. So it puts a target on your back. Whereas if you wait and you know what your AP is, and if you just take your AP divided by 80 and then multiplied by 20, you can roughly get how much AP you can generate by barb hunting. And you can do the same thing by taking your AP, dividing it by 300, multiplying it by the 100 honor you get for the high level forts, and do the same thing. But you can use that as a rule of thumb. And if your math comes out that you can do, 250,000 honor points, and the leader's 300,000 in front of you, you're obviously, the math isn't going to work out. And really, I conceivably imagine, usually in the last 2 or 3 days, the top honor rank pushes up from what I've seen 60 to 100,000 before, just depending on how competitive it is. And it definitely jumps up at least 10 to 20. Even in the quietest KvKs, I've seen 10 to 20,000 honor jump up. So if you are 200,000 behind, you have enough to get 220,000, chances are you're not going to hold that top spot, even if you expend every AP. And at that point, you spend all that AP just to look around and maybe leave empty-handed. So just be wise with your AP. I do recommend you pushing for at least the honor roll rewards from reaching your honor pulls on Path of Greatness. But outside of that, don't be too reckless with your AP early on. It's easier once you've got into Kingsland and you've got level 51 Barbarians to fight. Or even if you get into Zone 6 and you get the level 46 ones, it still cuts down your AP cost by 1.6 times. So for every 16 AP you're spending on level 41 barbs, you'd only have to spend 10 to get the same amount of honor with the level 46. So just be patient and let your passive AP do your work for you. And the biggest thing I can say when you're pushing honor, and in general, you should never miss a free ruins or a free altar. If the enemy is not contesting it, you should never, ever miss those ruins and altars. Because the honor you get from them are the freest, quickest, and really the most significant in the overall honor roll. And that's part of the reason why certain people will fall out, is if they lose KvK and they lose access to an altar or ruins, they can lose upwards of 40 to 50,000 honor points, even just from Kingsland to the end, just because you have so many ruins and altars that you're just straight up missing out on because the enemy has denied it to you. So make sure you're always making your ruins and altars, regardless of if you're pushing too, because it helps your kingdom, it helps your alliance, it helps you, and you just have to stand there. So believe me, it's the freest way to get points in the game. But with that, we will wrap up our first portion of the KvK Crash Course. This covered mostly PvE content, but I also tried to keep some stuff that is applicable to actual combat as well. But in next week's episode, we're going to be going over the actual basics of the combat and what to expect on that. But if you want to see something PvE or PvP covered in a future video, let me know in the comments, because depending on how many questions there are on this subject and the next subject, I may make a third video answering all your questions and covering some bonus things that I may have missed in this. Because there are so many different KvK formats, it is hard to track down everything into one concise format. So let me know in the comments if you want to see something specific covered. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you in KvK.